welcome to the show. How you doing?
Hey, doing well. Can y'all hear me all right?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Cool.
Would you just give us a little walkthrough of your background, what you do, how you got to the place you are in today?
No, that's a good question. Say like the Lord works in mysterious ways.
Hmm.
So we actually started this project. This is my fourth company. We started this project actually as a help you leave the cloud, don't be canceled.
Hmm.
And so what we found out is that data centers didn't have like a software stack to help them monetize customers. So
Hmm.
they basically they mentioned like you're a merchant selling t-shirts and Shopify didn't exist.
Hmm.
And so then we started building this. And then when the GPU craze started, the data centers were like, we need something to run this stuff. And then we
Hmm.
were there. And so we started that 4 years ago.
That's great.
And so like we never had the right customer in mind. But in terms of like a lot of the other stuff that happened with the space, it just had this really nice merriment of like, I've been working in public policy for over a decade as well. I have a foundation in DC, public policy think tank, and also been like doing like political stuff on the side. And then just so happens that like AI is the fastest, regulation in Silicon Valley history.
Hmm.
And people view it as if, it's regulated under missile technology law. That's how it's regulated right now.
Hmm.
People in DC literally view that Jensen is selling weapons of mass destruction to other countries.
Hmm.
And so that's why they use the word diffusion, proliferation, right?
Yeah.
Those are nuclear weapons words. So those are, this is not like in terms of politicians, they don't view this as if you're selling this fun little gaming gear to different
Yeah.
countries. So that's how we got into it, and now we're in I think over a dozen countries. We are in 50 data centers or something like that, doing hundreds of millions of dollars a year in transactions. Um, so we think GPUs are going to be everywhere, and kind of has reached that escape velocity. There's not really much the U.S. government can do about it at this point.
Yeah.
How did you react to the new Nvidia deal that got announced in the last week? Another $2 billion chips to China. You think it's
Oh,
just
you mean
there's enough?
the H200? They're talking about the reshoring thing with TSMC and Foxconn. Which
The
one? Are
first part.
Oh, yeah. I think it's positive because I think that the approach that Americans have to understand is that the way that China, and so like I'm a Chinese exile, my family fled communist China. We fought for the KMT, and during the Cultural Revolution, half of my whole family got murdered in China, and so fled to Taiwan and then here. So I'm a hawk of all hawks, and then my foundation also broke the story. If you remember the Chinese government buying land near the military bases. So like
Yeah.
my policy foundation like broke that story.
Wow.
And like I was telling John that all like a bunch of like Chinese ambassadors blocked me on Twitter, and because I was like harping on it came from a lab, like sort of thing. And but anyways, like the I think that the Americans like to think the world works as if Western kind of frameworks and philosophy. And a lot of if you like the history of Chinese and the way that they have accelerated their innovation curve, which is by the way like not we sort of treat that post Nixon era kind of frameworks as like how we got schooled. The pattern of China has always been to steal technology from other people. And so if you look at even how they got the first nuclear weapon, so the way that they got that, and this is just a quick side story because I think it's helpful for the West to understand just how they work. So if you remember, Eisenhower was asked, "Would we ever use a nuclear weapon against China to defend Taiwan?" And that actually whole story was planted by the Chinese
Hmm.
because China was trying Mao at the time. Mao was so crazy that even Stalin was like, that dude is freaking nuts and he kills his own people at too much, right? It's like he goes way too far. And, I just do a couple million, he's doing tens of millions, right? So Stalin was like, absolutely not. We're never giving you nuclear weapons ever, right? Because you're crazy. And so the Chinese basically invented this narrative and story, planted it in DC, created this line within the State Department that like, well, they could invade Taiwan. And so then got to the media, and then Eisenhower was asked, and then it was posted, and he said, yes, we would use a nuclear weapon to defend Taiwan. So then what Mao does, he goes back to Stalin, and he goes, hey, do you want have America on your borders? And Stalin goes, no, I don't want that, but I don't want to
Mm.
give you nukes. So what I'll do is I'll send Russian scientists to China to just co-develop a nuclear reactor with you, but just don't take my secrets, right? Then 5 years later, they have a nuclear weapon, right? So they've done that with nuclear submarines. They did that with fighter jets. They did that with SAMs. They did that with aircraft technology. So this is just like a long line of history of like how they kind of work as like a country. So, but when you're in an environment when they have 10 times the number of engineers as we do, they have a relatively centrally organized government that can execute big initiatives, but it's still a highly federalized government. So it's in the Shanghai province and Shanxi province. The governors kind of like all work separately, like in America, like they're hyper federalized. But generally they come up with these like kind of big initiatives and big plans. And so when it comes to like GPUs, we have to realize that they are very much closer than we think. Like the reason why iPhones are built there is because it's so technically complex to build an iPhone that we can't do that anywhere else. It's not because it's cheap. The cheapest place to build things is Mexico, like just by labor hours. But Mexico doesn't have the technical capability of doing that. And so when we have the situation with GPUs, you have to understand that it's not just like we can actually protect this technology for that long. The actual moats around the information asymmetry that we have as a nation towards China on the advancement of chips is much smaller than we think.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's like under 12 months. So if you think they're like 5 years away, I can be sympathetic to the imports controls, but if they're under a year, the goal is to win. The goal is to reach escape velocity like Oppenheimer moment, right? They brought everyone Los Alamos not to be secretive, it's because we had to win. We had to be first. Because whoever was first defined the entire era of what nuclear weapons became. And so and then we actually, by the way, cut off all of our allies too. We took the mathematicians from Britain. We said, hey, yeah, we'll share everything. And then we made the nuke and then we cut them off. And then they went to go build their own nuke. So it's kind of the same situation where building GPUs is actually much easier than the US government thinks, which is why Amazon's doing it, Microsoft's doing it, Facebook's doing it, Broadcom's now $1 trillion company. And the second is that their actual ability on the foundry side is more like a year or two behind. Mm-hmm. So in that scenario, it becomes where we need to distribute our technology like a Boeing asset to as many places in the world that wants to take it. Because then that becomes our footprint that we control, that we can continually express and influence that other country. Otherwise, Huawei is going to show up and is going to be like, hey, my thing is like, 80% is good, but it's cheap. And I'm not going to cut you off from the most important technology wave in the next 10, 15 years. And that's a pretty compelling argument if you think that you're another country. And so that's why I think this reorientation has to happen around where we actually are as a country in terms of how far we are ahead. But also we can take advantage of that because the stuff is like quite easy to deploy compared to like CPU infrastructure. And as well as the world wants it. And the most recent controls are a little bit dishonest because if you go look at the January 15 ruling, it adds Greenland and Portugal and Poland and Finland and it adds Greece and it adds basically everywhere in the world but 19 countries. So do we really think that Greenland is going to diffuse GPUs to China? No, it's because they have cheap power, right? So it's turned into this like protectionism thing where we're like, we have to protect our companies. And I'm like, wait a minute, like I thought this was about China. Like, so now we're like doing this to like protect and like isolate. And so one reason why we have lost the LLM race on the open source side is because we've done stuff like that. And I think that's putting us again another disadvantage about another advantage for Huawei because Huawei can be like, hey, I have the leading open source models. China does. It's unquestionable. And now I have a chip that's designed for it. So like we're putting ourselves in kind of a really difficult position and also a difficult position for NVIDIA because the reality is like this is the goal where we have to achieve escape velocity first, like with the nuclear weapon. Not like we can hold off this wall and like play these games with countries and just slow them down. In reality, it's like we just need to win. We need to stop like messing around and trying to do these kind of stupid games.
Can you give a hyper abridged version of your version of AI 2027? Like, what does hitting escape velocity look like? Kind of like a potentially like a white pill. Look like? What does winning look like?
I think America should have the largest GPU cluster in the world as a deterrent. That's what I mean by the nuke button. And that's a game of deregulating energy. They're kind of like the other things that I think are more widely accepted. Like to me, it's all energy should be acceptable. We can build on federal land. All that stuff's great. And we also need to reshore semis. But I think the way you reshore semis is not randomly tariffing stuff and then providing exemptions when you have a lobbyist that is convincing enough to go to the White House. I thought we were supposed to be opposed to that as a but I guess not now. So we should focus on deregulation and then subsidizing actual development here. goes in giving tax breaks for people to use the Intel foundry or TSMC's foundry
Hmm.
to like reshore. So I think it's building large GPU clusters in the world. I think it's being the production house for all advanced semiconductor work. But then also having so the way I would use that is like a new Monroe Doctrine that America is not going to rebuild the supply chain for fans and servers or fiber optic cables or anything like that. Like all that stuff, even that is not in China because China is too expensive to build there. So that's why they put it in Thailand and Malaysia and these other countries. But we can put that in like in Mexico. We can put that maybe we're outsourcing prisoners to El Salvador. Maybe we see if they can build fiber optic cables too. So like we can have a new Monroe Doctrine of like reshoring everything within this hemisphere,
Hmm.
and I think that's more of like a reasonable and also quite more achievable task than just saying everything has to come back into America. And then the next part relates to open source, where we have to just get better at this, and we haven't gotten better, I believe, because of protectionist measures that were mostly secondary effects. I don't think they were primary operating for that. I think it's just kind of more of a secondary outcome. But that's going to be how this space wins. It's going to be a myriad of models being used for wide different purposes, models that are highly specialized, and then kind of a separation between like platforms and service companies to help you run comp models and then the infrastructure. And so the infrastructure part we can actually win at because we're generally like we're good at taking the face. We're good at energy, but we're not good at power, if that makes sense. Like we're really good at like finding stuff and exploiting it out of the ground or building different types of energy frameworks. We're not really good at power. And I think that's where the rest of the world will
And
probably
power you're
actually be
defining
close.
as like converting that energy
Yes.
source into a, basically transferring that energy into chips, right? And like into the
Yes.
actual, cluster
Hmm.
effectively.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah, because you think that like power in our country is deregulated, mostly deregulated. I should say it's highly federalized.
Hmm.
So just because the federal government says you should build power plants doesn't mean Virginia is going to do it, right?
Hmm.
And that's designed to protect our rights as a nation. It's designed to protect the rights of a state. That the state ultimately is in charge of these things and has there's the reason why anything that's not enumerated in the Constitution is given to the states
Hmm.
is because the enumerated powers is designed to protect the states from big actions down as a do all these things. And that's what's created actually a very stable political environment. And I do think I'm opposed to tariffs in general, but I think people are kind of overreacting. They think that this is the end of the world and everything's going to be done. I was like, if America is that fragile, like a lot of bad stuff is going to happen either way because it's just not going to be one person that's going to take down our system because and I voted for Trump, and I don't believe that just from an ideological perspective, but also just the nature of our country. If you look at the history of our country, it's been through worse and it has survived because of the system and our ethos that we've built. So when it comes to like this situation, I think it's I'll quote I'll butcher a quote because he's way better at it than me, but there was a prime minister in England who used to say that that America is not good primary actor, but an excellent secondary actor. It wins secondary, never wins primary, and it's because we don't generally rise to the task that's in front of us. We kind of like go play around Netflix and kind of like mess around for a while and like spend money on energy that doesn't work and kind of basically BSing. And then all of a sudden something happens and then we're like, we gotta go to the gym. We have to win, and we're gonna win. We're gonna be freaking ruthless, right? And then we like show up, right?
Yeah.
And the rest of the world's like, hey, pay attention. And we're like, why? Like, there's a new episode of Love on the Spectrum, so that's what it should, like,
Yeah.
and so I think that's what's
Well, I
gonna happen
think
with AI. It's like,
the
yeah,
interesting thing right now is, and I'd be curious to get your take here. We had Jordan from China talk on just earlier, and I was asking him, I was like, do the Chinese laugh at us that we don't ban TikTok and DJI and Unitree and all these
hmm
companies that are just obvious national security threats that like you could just end and it would be controversial, but it's hard to argue. It's genuinely hard to argue in favor of allowing these companies to operate here when they wouldn't allow the same companies to operate. Um,
hmm
I want to kind of unpack something. One thing, my sense is that you have a much greater fear of a U.S. Adversary like China with superintelligence, with the biggest cluster in the world, than
hmm
superintelligence by itself, right? So, like, is it true that you're sort of like P doom involves, China winning the AI race and then, using that to exert, power and influence over us and the rest of the world.
It's more of a it's more of like losing soft power and relevancy. I think of it as a let's think maybe like a metaphor to help. Like, so let's think about airplanes. So Boeing is a national security asset, right? It exists at the pleasure of the U.S. government, right? And so it's not, obviously we don't own it, right? But it's clearly if something happened, we would do something. So same with like SWIFT, right? Same with the U.S. dollar. That's why the bond stuff is the most concerning out of the tariff drama is the behavior on long-term bonds. Basically, the U.S. liquidity is declining, which is like a very scary kind of thing because we are the default reserve currency and being pegged to the dollar. And so the social influence is what creates wealth for America. That being the policeman of the world doesn't mean just like where y'all live and where I live, the police aren't here in my house right now. But it's the fact of like they run it. And when we run the free world, everyone gets wealthier, we get more powerful and more meaningful, and we can continue to bring people out of poverty, introduce human rights, all these like great things that I think God has chosen America to be the representation of to the world. And so I view more like China is not a kinetic country, and it has kinetic abilities, totally true. But the most meaningful war that China's ever fought is the Indo-China War. It was a couple thousand people. That's it in the history of their country. Like, and they've done proxies. That's true. Not at the scale of Iran, but obviously North Korea is the biggest proxy, and they played a little bit in Southeast Asia. But they're pretty racist as a country, so they don't really consider all the Asians equal. So it's just more who's on the border. Like China is mostly CCP is mostly interested in preservation and insulation. Like that's what they're interested in. And so because we express a mimetic desire to be expansionist, because fundamentally the Western philosophy is expansionist. This is based on Judeo-Christian frameworks about being evangelical and being free orientation. I think it's also the way humans are designed to be freely in commerce with each other. That presents an adversarial view to China. But fundamentally, China, I will give you another very, very specific example too. Like the number of amphibian shipping vessels to actually take people from mainland to Taiwan, they have around 20 or 30. They're actually capable of crossing that. So if they're planning on invading, you don't do 20 or 30, right? And the number of military you need is actually
But hasn't Palmer talked about,
yes, even commercial ships are
ships
outfitted to serve the purpose of an invasion.
But again, that's asymmetric. So like China thinks asymmetrically. They don't think, they think in the manner of how do I get something to happen towards my favor without ever having to fight a bullet? That has been their entire foreign policy since existing, like the Stalin example, how they got submarines, how they got fifth-gen fighters, like how they actually infiltrate Silicon Valley. Like they're everywhere in Silicon Valley. Like that's totally true. They've taken our P. Was that asymmetric or is that symmetric? Asymmetric. So that's the way they think about the world. And so, for example, like she took out Hu Jintao, right, publicly. Why? It's because the way that CCP works is like when it's confronted with a significant adversarial problem, like outside of the country, what typically happens is they replace the president or the premier. And so Hu Jintao was the most logical person to actually come and replace Xi. So he sidelined. If you look at also all of a sudden there's a bunch of people in the Central Committee and the Standing Committee that have disappeared now. They have gone somewhere. It's because if the history of the CCP is that when it's confronted with a challenge like Tiananmen Square, someone all of a sudden that person just disappears. They get sidelined in the Standing Committee. And that is the pattern of how the actual, because it's interested in the preservation of its party. Does a war increase the likelihood of preservation or decrease? Like it decreases. Like every war does that. So because you know who's going to win. So they'd rather play asymmetrically because it's more of an assurance that they are going to win. Because we as a country are not very good at that. Asymmetric takes advantage of our Western ideas. So I don't disregard that.
How do you think about American soft power in the context of, the two highest profile consumer AI products that I think are top of mind right now are Manus. And I'm saying that in a very American sound. Manus. And Manus.
DeepSeek.
And DeepSeek.
DeepSeek.
And we had Tyler Cowen on the show yesterday, and he was basically saying, these companies are basically trained on Western models, and by nature of
Yeah.
that, the sort of
Yeah.
Western thought is baked into them, and that's some form of soft power for the West.
But I just don't want to go back to the Boeing example. I don't want France to have Huawei gear. I want it to be NVIDIA gear because that's an expression of America. So
Mhm.
that's what I want.
Yeah.
And that's the mitigation thing of like if we allow them to continue to asymmetrically take over the world through a new Belt and Road Initiative. The first one failed
Yeah.
because they couldn't actually fund it as a society, and the delivery of the products was actually pretty bad. I've been
You
to
mean like
several.
roads that are, you know, basically cracked in half, and like dams
Mhm.
that don't work, and
Yeah.
Belts that would
ports
fall
that
apart when you try to
Yeah,
pull up your pants.
and
No.
and it's everywhere in Africa. If you talk to like I've been to Africa, you can see some stuff behind me from Africa. Like you talk to them, there's cars there with Chinese letters and stuff, and everyone in Africa says it's garbage stuff that they had to fix
Mhm.
locally.
Mhm.
So it just was a failed experiment. But they're generally very good at this kind of focus manufacturing to export to create asymmetric influence.
Mhm.
Like that's their goal. And I'm more interested in how that sort of as it relates to AI, how a footprint of Huawei, similar as we responded with ZTE, that how that would negatively impact our ability to influence foreign policy in Europe or in South America or Africa. Like that's more of my concern, not that they're going to invade Taiwan. I just think that that's like a very American Western way of looking at the situation. When the Pentagon says that it would take the entire People's Republic Army
Mhm.
to take like the entire, not
Yeah.
not not 80%, 120%, including reserve to run Taiwan if they
Mhm.
actually
Yeah.
invade it? Or would it be easier just to have a Manchurian candidate?
Mhm.
Manchurian candidate, like flood the airways with like fake AI, stuff into
Mhm.
Taiwan and try to flip a party. There is an entire party dedicated to closer relationships in Taiwan in the Taiwan Parliament. So why would they invade? It's just an American way of responding because that's how we respond
Yeah.
when like someone's like, hey, they punch us. We're like, hey, we're on to freaking launch missiles from a frigate and like destroy your
Yeah.
country. Right? That's like the way we think about the world. And it doesn't mean that like I'm a hawk on China. It's like what is the enemy? And I think we are appealing to the enemy, but these export controls and
Mhm.
regulating AI, trying to do these proliferation diffusion rules, treating AI as if it's a weapon and regulating as such, that enables the Manus and the DeepSeek to be
I love it.
prolific, right? I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's why we're not doing open source, is because all these like regulation stuff is happening on in the West, and China's like, whatever, we'll just diffuse the model and like
Yeah.
everyone go to town, right?
Yeah.
We won the internet because we were free and open. China's winning AI because it's free and open, not because they care about that.
Well,
It's
Mark
because we're
Zuckerberg would like a
closed.
word. He's trying with Llama 4. It's been a mixed reaction, but he is trying.
Mixed, yeah.
What
Uh,
No, yeah, yeah,
can
yeah,
you
yeah.
talk about, something I find fascinating is the companies that feel extremely significant right now to U.S. national security, Huawei, the
Hmm.
TikToks, Unitree, DJI, they're all private, right? And I'm assuming that that's like, there's various reasons you'd want to be private. One is
Hmm.
they can access plenty of capital, but another obvious reason is that if you don't, all your metrics can be made up. You can be doing all these things. You can be taking all the state funding, right? Like you can just
Hmm.
basically directly serve the state in a way that it just becomes much harder. Uh,
Hmm.
do you expect companies, not financial advice or anything like that, but do you expect companies like, Huawei and DJI and Unitree, all these critical companies to just stay private forever?
Like, sure. I mean, I think of it as again, going back to like China is such a massive country, it's very federalized.
mhm.
So think of it as the Chinese people are very different than CCP, clearly, and and so when China has something that's very successful, like the DeepSeek phenomena, what happens is that the CCP co-ops it, but everything up to that point is China, like the Chinese people, like
Mhm.
because we speaking for my dad, is Chinese, they're very industrious, they're very driven people. It's just part of the mindset, but also you're very skeptical. It's a very actually low trust society,
Mhm.
similar to like India and some other Asian countries. And so like my dad's in CDs. He doesn't like stock market. Like he doesn't trust banks and stuff like that. It's just kind of like his natural like kind of like framework of the world.
Wiring.
And yeah, yeah. And but the desire to be industrious is like it's innate to the kind of orientation around what it means to have a Chinese philosophy. And so when CTV adopts stuff like that, it's like to get to the next level as a company, you have to join the communist state apparatus. And so everyone who's like a big company is co-opted in. But to say that, and this is where it's different than like Leninist style communism, is like they're Mao adopted. I mean, I 100% oppose communism, but you got to be fair about what actually happened. Like Mao took that as an authoritarian concept and just pressed it down on the people. Like it's not a they're not purist in any sense. They're almost like a bit like rationalists, like because they like they want to be powerful and they want to stay in power. So if the ideology has to change, it'll change.
Yeah.
And so that's where they let many of these successful companies in China that are, okay, as the New York Times says, flooding the European markets with cheap goods now. It's like, well, they're flooding our markets with cheap goods. Many of those are done by just Chinese entrepreneurs. Like it's just no state interaction. But anything that's extenuating beyond the state and a meaningful national security, like an industry that is really national security, like the CCP is utterly in control of that. But you have to understand the etiology, the like where it came from, then understand the teleological framework of like where they want to go with it, rather than treating it as if, like I personally don't believe, for example, that China is interested in spreading communism, and they don't have a common turn like Soviet Union did to spread communism. Like they're interested in preservation, and so that is not a type of a country where you're like, that they're going to go to war at any chance they get. In fact, they're very hesitant. They're very hesitant to war. And if you read a book about like a history about China, there's a common pattern in history of China, which is self-implosion. They've done it like 4 times. So like they also know that too. Like it just ends up being where like, so, then it's all kind of falls apart. Right. And I love a book by Rodney Stark. He said that China invented gunpowder at the same time as Europe did. And China put it in fireworks to scare off ghosts. And Europeans put it in a barrel to shoot a bullet.
Yeah.
Right. And so that it tells you like very industrious, very, driven in terms of ethos, but it doesn't always land the plane. And that's what I'm leaning into is like, yeah, Huawei will make something cheap. We'll make something alternative to NVIDIA. But like, let's like not give them the rope where they're like, America's opposed to proliferation, it's opposed to exports, it's opposed to open source. Is like you're giving them all the fuel to be like, come to China, we'll give you AI, even though it's not as good.
Yeah, that idea of like mimetic rivalry in geopolitics is fascinating to me because I don't know if you've read Wang Huning's America Against America, but it was this book that basically they sent an emissary to the United States. He looks around and he determines that America will implode, and it's clearly like their own anxieties about implosion writ onto the American story. But America is undefeated and we're not going to implode. It's the last thing that will happen.
I think it's closest thing to heaven. Like, it's great. It's an awesome, my family loves being here and it's been an immense blessing. My grandpa came here with nothing.
Well, this interview has also been the closest thing to heaven. It's been fantastic.
I have a couple. Do you have a hard stop?
Do you have a hard stop? You want to
keep
going?
No, I don't. Yeah.
Okay, let's keep chatting.
I got a couple more questions.
Let's do it.
One, what does having the largest cluster, right? This like supercomputer, super weapon, in some ways, what does that actually look like in practice? Is it run by who sort of operates it? Is it a network of clusters? What does that actually look like in your view?
Yeah, I would say it'd be run by Department of Energy, a combination with NIST. It'd be deployed in a place that's undisclosed, and it's used mostly as training in our own side, as in our own military, on like advancing their own capabilities of understanding what LLMs can do, understanding like how compute can work at scale. Because like LLMs are, again, super cool. We all use them every day. But it's really the parallelized computing that it changes the way which warfare works. And that when you have the ability to scale that amount of computing power at a single moment, it makes all types of, which mostly is targeted towards asymmetric sort of attacks on us. We have to be able to understand like what that actually means at that scale. And so it's not Stargate that's clearly for OpenAI. It's not like the DoD sec should like email Sam and say, hey, can I borrow this for, like it has to be something that we own, we control, that is part of the people's power. And the point of that also is a deterrent, saying that if you people will do something bad with AI that is inescapable. It's part of the fallen nature of humanity that we take great things and we apply maladaptive adjustments to it, and so we have to just be prepared for that. And what that attack means, I don't think we fully understand yet. We have theories around it, but I believe that it's going to be some form of attack on our infrastructure that's not designed to handle this form of sort of computing power targeted at us. So it's mostly being used as a deterrent, and also kind of show our footprint as in, like, we are going to be the best at this. And taking a small slice of the how the budget can be 5 trillion, just to like say that we're investing
didn't
this
the
as a country.
F-35 cost about a trillion?
1 trillion investment by the United States. A lot less to copy it, actually. Turns out when you can write off all the R&D costs, it's actually a pretty great plane.
Yeah, and so that's saying it's like you lean into going back to the bad Mises thing, and I know you like Gerard.
Yeah.
So like it's like we just lean into so much of like what China's really good at. Like, why are we shocked that deep sea happened? Like, literally, like how, look at Timu Shin, look at, like you said,
they're great
fighter
at going
jets, like
one to many. That's what China does best.
Yeah, so like we have to do
it's
what
actually
we're
2
really
trillion,
good at, right?
2 trillion.
2 trillion. Wow, jeez.
I guess on this, one question I have is, again, because this conversation is top of mind, but Tyler Cowen yesterday was very excited about AGI coming in the next couple days. We don't know exactly what he meant.
Fastest timeline possible.
Fastest timeline. Extremely AGI.
Well, it's a social network.
But
OpenAI is launching a social network.
Yeah, that might be
AGI.
it. But I want to, like, this conversation's been tremendously fascinating. I'd love to get sort of your personal definition, how you look at, AGI, and then what your timelines look like around it.
So I can answer this differently, but I think it's more honest, is that if you don't know what you're looking for from a prima facie perspective, you don't know how to measure it. Mm-hmm. So how do you measure if someone's intelligent? Is it SAT? Is it do they make money? Is it that they're wise?
Crack jokes.
Is it good people? Yeah, the funny, right? And I think that's where the AGI problem hits a wall, which is like, what am I even measuring against? Like when it happens, when every single one of those tests, which are, by the way, just randomly picked out of a hat, an LLM 100% across, and it still doesn't fully work. Mm-hmm. What do we do, right? And that's the fundamental anthropomorphic question, which is a metaphysical question of, like, this is why it's so fun. I have a background in philosophy and in theology. It's like, what does it mean to be a person? What does it mean to actually represent intelligence? And many people who push ASI, AGI, they have a very piss poor understanding. Like, they didn't read Locke. They don't know who Descartes is. They don't. Rousseau is a stranger. Like, they've read some Nietzsche because it's cool in high school, but there's very little understanding about the longevity and the history of what we have valued as just a social creature, and the evolution of our culture, to say, like, what is meaning and purpose and intelligence, and even the epistemology of, there's a difference between information, data, numbers, and knowledge. Like, all those from epistemological perspective are completely different things, right? Like, knowledge is the discrimination of information. Data is the series of numbers. And if you look at people pushing AGI and ASI, they typically, one, have a very low view of humanity. Like, their anthropology is like, we're robots, we're a reductionist thing, like, we're all biology, and which is, like, kind of been rejected since the new atheists have fallen aside. And they kind of have all those presuppositions built into it, versus a person like me, who's like, I'm an evangelical Christian. Like, I don't have that view of humans. I think that there is an immaterial part of our nature. Numbers are immaterial. Data is numbers. Like, it's pretty logical to believe that, like, we are ourselves an immaterial. There's something about it. Therefore, I can't actually put it in bits and bytes. Mm-hmm. So AGI and ASI, I think, is a trope to kind of make an interesting marketing angle. Again,
the other thing is, it's marketing, and there's conflicts, and it's hard to find somebody that works in AI, that obviously is intelligent on, however you want to look at it, that doesn't have at least a $10 million, position riding on the AGI marketing, like this sort of, like, it's almost here, like it's coming type of thing. And so that's why I was,
it's not. I just don't believe. It doesn't mean it's not going to be valuable. That's the confusion.
Yeah.
Is that if you create this trope, this red herring that's not going to be there, you then false flag, build a bubble, and it's bad for everybody.
Yeah.
I think LLMs is as Founders Fund would say, is that I have a Star Wars view of the world, not a Star Trek view of the world, and that technology is a positive adaptation of the human capability to extend its arm further, and it only helps humans become more human things. And so a lot of the AGI ASI talk it's really built on presuppositions of a negative view, a negative anthropology that is not only been disproven over and over again philosophically and theologically, but it just doesn't bear itself in the science. Like the mind itself is, as an example, you can go back in the 80s and 70s and 50s. They were like, the mind is this. We have fully discovered what the mind is. And then 10 years later, it's like, we don't know what the mind is. Like it continues to expand. And I think that relates to, unless you can actually pinpoint and understand what intelligence is on the anthropology side, you're not going to be able to ever measure AGI or have an ASI.
Interesting. Anything else, Jordy?
Oh, I'd love to keep going for
great.
another hour,
Well, I mean,
but
we
we'll
can
have you back on again
Yeah,
soon.
that's the beauty
This
of the
was
show.
great.
This is fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm sure we can go way deeper.
I appreciate it.
Yeah,
This
this
is
was
great.
really fun. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah.
Aaron. Thanks
Cheers.
so much.
Yeah, that was guys. Bye.
That's great.